so it isn't a very good, it isn't a direct parallel, it isn't a perfect analogy to what we're dealing with here. The thing that I am after though at this juncture is a way to get some engagement and excitement. And actually, I think an RFP process could end up being very confirming in some ways, where the attention should be focused.
So rather than just being critical of that approach, what I would suggest is that we turn to some specialists. Jay Reich is a great example, somebody who's been through this process, who has a sense of what the development community can do, is motivated to do, and have him take a look at our overall area and help us bring some focus to a smaller set of sites. That's really what I'm asking for. I also think that we need to engage the larger council in this discussion as well. And I know that we would need to do that before we go out with an RFQ anyway. It's in the proposal as it stands today.
Mm-hmm.
But my sense is that, frankly, the list of goals or the things that we're trying to achieve that we're talking about tonight are kind of mom and apple pie, and again, don't touch the ground. Yes, we want better quality development in our downtown. Yes, we want more economic development in our downtown. But that doesn't provide the kind of guidance that I think the process needs. So we may just
give
have
me some
different.
example. What's your criteria? What guidance and what place do you have?
Oh, I'd like to limit the list to 3 sites rather than 6.
Which 3?
I'd like to talk to Jay Reich about that, about which have the greatest feasibility of being successful. Your comments earlier this evening about the isthmus sounded almost like an all or nothing, that you know, we'll lose the opportunity, and if we don't bite off a big piece with Capitol Center building, then it will just be market driven. And I'm actually not of that mind at all. I think that we could do something relatively modest on the isthmus that would be beneficial, whether it's with the city-owned properties or with another private property owner out there. That isn't necessarily Capitol Center. I'm not ruling out Capitol Center. I'm simply saying that I think that the way the equation has been formatted to this point, when we look at the isthmus, it's kind of been this all or nothing approach. I don't know. That's my sense of it.
One other piece of information, we did talk to Jay Reich further, it was last Friday.
Oh, great.
And his thought was that we focus in on these properties and these property owners to see whether or not they're interested in participating, you know, to help us narrow this field down, and then describing a process that allows them to, not a completely low barrier entry, but a lower barrier than designing an entire project. I mean, obviously that includes plans and some pictures, but not down to the level of, you know, leasable square footage and developing a pro forma necessarily. And then using the RFP process or the RFQ process to identify who preferred partners could be going down the road. Because I don't think we want to look at the RFP process as necessarily an end. It's really a beginning of a negotiation process. I mean, we may get one proposal, or we may get 3 or 5, but ultimately we have to select which one of these, or more than one, can we work with, and can we expect the greatest results for the community, and then get into some really detailed evaluation of the proposals, and developing more specificity in the plan. But step 1, put the request out, what's out there, but really, before that, even knocking on some doors and saying, hey, this is what we're thinking about. Does this make sense to you? Is this something that you'd be willing to participate in? If not you, then, you know, how about this developer group that we know of? They might be interested in the project. Would you cooperate there? And that's the kind of thing that Jay can help us with.
So we've done that to some extent. I mean, we have been in contact with all of those owners and talked about this conceptually, have we not?
No, not directly. We haven't had any conversations with the owners, the current owners of the Capitol Tower property, for example. And specifically, this is our approach that we're proposing. This is our expectation. Does this work for you? And that's the kind of thing that Jay can help us with, having that conversation with individual property owners. What are their needs? What would induce them to participate? And what would the expectation be from the city, on the city side of the equation?
Well, I appreciate that, because I think that is a narrowing process and does help us get to what I think
So
is a better place than what I'm seeing.
I don't think we're ready to go out for the RFP, tomorrow morning on the scope of measures. I think we still have some work to do with these individual property owners to really understand what their interests are. Jay can help us with that. If we can come back again in a couple of weeks to the CERC and report back on that work, and then continue this discussion.
I guess the kind of question that I'm hoping that Jay can also help us with is one of scale. What is the relative feasibility of the sort of scenarios that we were looking at? And I know they were just scenarios to look at financial return and financial participation, but what's the relative feasibility of a large-scale isthmus proposal versus a tradition strip rehabilitation, for example? I mean, given the current economic conditions, given the current set of development firms that are in our region, active in our region, I mean, I don't have a sense of that sort of thing.
I really don't understand. I mean, what you're saying doesn't make any sense at all to me. I am not clear at all with what your concerns are. They're so deeply abstract in terms of concerns about how the public might perceive something, concern about developers generally might perceive something. The two examples that you gave, in terms of the development process, I don't think that there's any way to pull all uncertainty out of things. We have to be clear that I'm not sure if it's a matter of if I say broad, you say narrow, and if I say narrow, you say broad.
I don't think that's the case.
Okay, so help me understand in really concrete terms what it is that you're concerned with about, we're trying to bring more specificity to an RFP process. I think we're all in agreement that, and we put Jay Reich under contract to help us do that. That's an evolving process. And Jay, I think we may all be in agreement that he has expertise to help with the language of how to construct an RFP. At this juncture, I think our task at hand is confirming all the properties that we might be interested in for examination. I think we're all in agreement that this still needs to go before the full council for additional discussion. So again, I don't understand any kind of narrowing process at this juncture. I think we're all in agreement that ultimately, when we're ready for we have several steps to take before we get there. And unless I can get some kind of clarity or understanding of how you would go about narrowing the projects down at this point, I don't see how it makes sense to start with that presumption for where we are at the moment in drafting an RFP.
So I feel as though the approach that we're taking right now is more of a shotgun approach than we should, and that we need to exhibit some leadership, that we know what it is that our downtown would most benefit from. I also think that there's some feasibility on the part of, financial feasibility on the part of the city, on what we could absorb in terms of our debt limits, of what we would be able to bring to bear. And so that defines the scale of the project that we can undertake. I don't see that reflected in what we're doing so far. But primarily, I feel as though we're asking an outside developer to come and do research at a level that I just don't think is appropriate. I think that if I was in the development community, and I'm not, and I saw this RFP, I would walk away from it, because it doesn't give me the sense that you know what the heck you're doing. Where do you want investment? What leadership are you going to bring to the process to work with your community to show the path forward? Instead, you've got a list of sites that are all over downtown that have very different characteristics. And my response would be, well, what do you want to do? Why are you taking the shotgun approach?
Well, why don't you answer that question for me? What is it that you want to do? And how do you suggest being more specific?
Well, I think that we've been through a process with our advisory committee, and we've found an advisory committee that is divided. We've got folks that are telling us that we can do things on the isthmus, and that's where we should be. We've got other members of our advisory committee that tell us absolutely the opposite, to stay away from that area, to take on something relatively small, to prove the concept. And I think it's our job to weed through the comments that we're getting, to use the data that we have about our community, and as a council of 7, to hammer that out. I mean, I have my ideas about what we should be doing, and I can lay those out. But frankly, I don't think that contributes to this discussion this evening.
Actually, if you don't lay it out, it's just going to remain a mystery.
I think we should take on a small project. I think that we should not take on a large isthmus project. If there's a small isthmus project that makes sense, great, let's go prove the concept. I also think that the isthmus is an annex to downtown. I think that the downtown is where our focus should be. I think a Main Street type project is more appropriate. But that's just my opinion, and
well,
that's not.
Thank you for getting your
But
opinion on the table.
That's fine, but that's not actually, my opinion, my larger opinion is that we need to do our homework, and that we need to be able to bring forward a set of projects that we want the development community to come forward with us. And it isn't about where I think it should be placed. Instead, it's where the council thinks it should be placed. And we need to go through that process and use our resources with staff and others to define a much smaller set of projects to be brought forward, that we have confidence that our community will support, because at least in most of the concepts that are available, we have to go out for a bond issue in order to get this done.
Not necessarily.
In most of the concepts.
I want to jump in for a minute.
Okay.
Okay, and I want
We
to,
need public support regardless of whether we're on the ballot or not.
right, but what I want to come at this from a different angle, so bear with me. I think we need to keep 2 things in mind. Number 1, intent, and number 2, impact, okay? What is the intent of this, and who is impacted by it? Who are the 2 groups we're trying to bring to the table? It's the public and the developers. That's really who we have to get to the table in order for anything to move in our downtown, okay? So, I love this line in here. Community renewal gives the public sector a more formidable seat at the development table. We've never had that, because we've never worked together. So it will enable more viable and better quality, private redevelopment while achieving, you know, greater public good and overcoming blight. And how we do that is by, we construct the RFP very specifically, but it is broad enough that if I'm a property owner and I read this and go, I have this project in mind and this tool would work for me, I'm gonna bring it forward and see what we can work on together. And when you do that, you're gonna have those other people bring it to all their ideas to the table. And then you take that to the public and say, okay, let's work through this and see if it works. In my mind, that's how the whole process works. But if we narrow it, I'm concerned that if we narrow it to one, we're gonna lose out. Because, okay, we say it has to be this one, well, what if it's not viable? I mean, and then we're asking the public to do all this work they're not gonna understand without saying, look, here are the projects that it's not gonna be viable if a developer doesn't come to us and say, I'm willing to try. We can say we want this, we can say this is what we're willing to do, but if that developer's not coming to the table, how's the public ever gonna get a seat at the table? So for me, it's about opening that net up, letting people come forward. We're very specific in kind of you can be very specific in what you request. We want these type of projects, I don't care how you do it, something, we can come up with criteria, and maybe that's where we ask somebody to help us narrow the criteria, but that it casts a wide net. So then when they come forward, we ask the public, okay, we narrow it down to a certain extent with our criteria, we have to, but then we go to the public and say, look, these are the possibilities. What can we do working together to make this happen?
Yeah, well said.
Well, I'm still supportive of multiple sites
Right.
and again, my concept of this RFP, RFQ process is a design competition that is then taken to the public. Where we ask for some public input on a
But you want-
specific proposal,
But you wanna start with a very small site, a single site.
not a single site.
Uh,
You asked me,
You just, anything but the isn't.
when you asked me for what concepts I had, I provided both a Main Street and an isthmus option, but relatively small. I don't think that we have the capacity or the experience to take on a major project.
So, but why not see what someone has to offer? I mean, we could get an offer of a proposal that the city doesn't do very much at all. And we get where we either do conduit financing or some other aspect that helps lift the project to feasibility, and it could be any number of things. But I'm sorry to be, I'm still struggling. I wish we had more common language in terms of how the development process works in a situation like this where you're trying to close a feasibility gap. It doesn't make sense for us to narrow the focus on the front end because we don't have the information to do that in an effective way. We're actually in something that may appear to be quite simple and easy from a public vantage. It doesn't have any feasibility whatsoever from a private finance capital perspective.
Well, then we've not done our job.
Actually, and this is one place where I think we most sharply agree, I don't think we have the expertise to do that work. And that's why you do RFPs, and that's why you set essentially the rules for engagement, but you do bring in people like Jay Reich and others that can help with packaging a proposal that has financial feasibility based on financial capacity of an investor. Keith?
Earlier, Mayor Pro Tem Jones had said that if you were a developer and you received this, you would probably put it in the wastebasket. I agree. If randomly, you get something in the mail regarding an RFP contact. That very well may be your response. But if you have somebody contact that person in advance, explain to them what the city's trying to accomplish, explain to them what the city's considering, then maybe you increase the odds of them responding and giving at least some consideration. So again, that I see as being part of Jay's role here. One other thing that may be helpful here as we move forward is 2 weeks from this evening, we're having a development roundtable.
You bet.
There's a great opportunity to sit down with a group of people and talk about, hey, this is something that we're thinking about, to start that conversation very broadly. This is what we're thinking about. How do you respond to that? How would you help us improve that process to maximize our interest, to maximize our response? We're thinking broad. You think it'd be better if we were narrow? These are some of the sites that we're considering. Here are some of the tools that the city can bring to the table to help facilitate that process and get the feedback from that group. And frankly, that's what I hope we would use the development roundtable for, was to help us further this process and refine it. Again, at least from my perspective, I don't think we're ready to roll out the door with this yet. And even with Jay's help, I don't think we are. But we got some work to do, and I think with Jay's help, with the development roundtable, Mike was here to talk about that next, we can make progress in that direction. I don't know if we necessarily need to make conclusions about that this evening. We know that we want to have a broad CRA, and now we're talking about what are the projects that fit in there. I'm not sure that, again, in talking with Jay, whether or not we need to even make that decision. We can make the decision about having an RFP process, sort of defining the process, defining our objectives, but we don't need to be specific about the projects in that RFP process, or in the CRA, in the CRA ordinance. And that's something that we're continuing to talk to Jay about. What does that look like? What do we need to, for the ordinance? And then, of course, it's refining the RFP, and they're not necessarily the same thing.
I just want to say one more thing on this subject, and I want to respond to part of what you were saying, Jim. Your suggestion was that we would be able to get more and better proposals with a broader set of opportunities, if I understood that. And all I want to do is say that I think that both of us are looking for more and better proposals, and the question is, what's the strategy to get there? I think we're both trying to achieve, I think we're all trying to achieve the same thing. It's just, what do we think is gonna work?
You have me confused. My own sense and my fear is that, this continues to be sort of a fear-based process with council members strongly divided by different factional groups that are a very small number of people that are saying, no, you gotta do it this way, or, don't touch the isthmus, that's the third rail, or, do Griswolds and Griswolds only, or.
I hope we're doing some of our own thinking as well.
Well, actually, I'd like some evidence of that. And it's hard to find at this point. We're an hour and 10 minutes in, and we haven't even really talked about bullet number 3 at all. It's all been this fear-based thing of what's the public gonna do? We're not being clear enough. Where's the leadership? It's the abstractions that I get really frustrated about. It's presumptions about how developers in this abstract sense are gonna respond to this, or that we, rather than sort of, it's like, let's ask, let's invite participation. Let's get some different people into this conversation. I'm actually concerned with the roundtable. It's like we're gonna get the same people at the roundtable. I'm actually,
I don't think so.
well, I was
That's
hopeful
not the
that,
intention.
I was hopeful that, I mean, one of the things that I was beginning to feel a little bit of encouragement about was that the RFP might be a way to spark some new interest in the city and the region.
I would hope so. That's the
well,
whole point.
So, let me try to divert us just a little bit.
No,
in
I
terms
feel
of-
like I need to respond, because I feel as though, and maybe I'm just being a little personal here, but I don't think I'm operating out of a place of fear. And I also feel that what I was asking for was more expertise to be brought to the process earlier on. I asked for Jay and perhaps others to give us more guidance on what would be more marketable and more feasible. So I don't think I'm trying to not look to other sources of information. I think the Development Roundtable is a part of what I'm trying to look for as well, and to bring in other voices and other advice to guide us through that process. And what I'm trying to say is I think that that's our responsibility as community leaders to provide more guidance as to what we believe is going to serve the community, rather than to do a broad, again, shotgun approach. So I hope that you weren't characterizing my comments as being fear-based or reflecting some particular small group that you've been hearing from on an ongoing basis. I just didn't feel as though, if you were summarizing what I have said, I think that perhaps you were missing what I was saying. So,
Perhaps I am missing what you're saying. There's a lot of common ground in terms of what we're trying to do. I don't think we've caught up with the things that we have been trying to get accomplished. And Jay has been swirling around out there for a couple of months. The RFP, the draft that's here is nowhere even at a 5%.
Pre-preliminary?
Yeah, so, I mean, there's been a backlog of stuff that has not been completed around this work that has been frustrating to me. Maybe if that work had been done, you wouldn't feel like there was going to be a risk of what you're characterizing as a shotgun approach. I don't think we should take a shotgun approach. I think we should be really clear in terms of what we're trying to accomplish. I mean, my metaphor is more, I think what Julie said was casting a broad net, at least to start with. Because that's what we're working with at this time. But I do get concerned when I'm hearing some strong assumptions or presumptions about how a development community in the abstract might respond to a final RFP that is yet to be drafted, or crafted might be a better word. I want to try to move us just a little bit if I can.
Great, I just want to affirm that I think that an approach of working with the property owners and having more in-depth conversations with them about their acceptance of this concept is a great part of the set of things we need to do next.
And, yeah, I think that's part of the program, is trying to get the property owners engaged. I think they're, quite frankly, looking for some leadership. In terms of the sites of interest, I'm just gonna, by extension, just explain a little bit of where I was coming from in terms of this process of where we are now. I'm much more interested in adding definition to the possibilities within this boundary that we've established. And to me, I wanted to add the Vine Street property as a property of interest. So you're nodding yes, but I don't get it, that.
Well, I'm talking about the plan. I definitely think it belongs in the plan.
Okay, so, and the Georgia Pacific Building, as another site. And I also would like to hear, some opinion from our consultant and others about the possibility of bringing in, all the properties in our area of interest that are currently being used for surface parking, which I think is another characteristic of our downtown that's problematic in terms of development and in terms of our urban landscape. But those are two specific properties that I was interested in including in the plan, and then the concept of bringing surface parking into the plan is another area that I was interested in having some discussion about adding. And the reason for surface parking to be added in the plan really goes directly to my reading of the RCW, which where we have a large percentage of our downtown landscape dominated by surface parking. And I'm sort of curious in terms of ratios around that, but I'm also thinking of that as being fairly representative of fragmented ownership, disinvestment or limited investment in our downtown.
I think that's an interesting concept. One of the requirements of the RCW is to have a financially feasible plan, and that's a pretty broad scope. When we start talking about all the surface parking lots within our community, so narrowing that down to specific areas or specific lots would be helpful as far as being able to get to that financially feasible plan.
So somewhere we're missing, because I'm not talking about this is a characteristic of our downtown in terms of surface parking, or the dominance of surface parking. List of characteristics, other characteristics: soil contamination,
Sure.
liquefaction, loss of jobs in our downtown area. It doesn't mean that we're trying to take all the surface parking lot.
Okay,
It's a characteristic.
okay. Well, I would agree with you that surface lots are definitely an indicator of lack of investment in the downtown. It's a holding pattern at best.
Right. So, is that worth adding?
We have that information that's easily added to the plan.
Yeah, and I guess the, by extension for me is, ultimately, I mean, I would be looking for some strategy of getting, of stimulating investment in available property. In terms of what sites I'm specifically interested in, it's really the list that we have now, plus the Vine Street property, between Columbia and Capitol.
Mhm.
And, but I'm not sure if it is ceased, I'm not sure what the east-west streets are.
A and B, I think.
Is it A and B? So, but I think we need to define what, when we say Vine Street property, need to
Sure.
come up with an address or something, you know, something that's being more specific.
As we develop the RFP, clearly there'd be maps included, there would be property descriptions of what's currently on the property.
Yes, and even in our public this evening, we had one question of what does Vine Street mean? So being able
Sure.
to.
Yeah, we know what it means, it's, but, yeah, we need to find out, be specific and clear. I agree.
Okay,
And Georgia Pacific, what's your thoughts on that?
I just like it included in the mix.
In the plan.
I
Okay,
think it is a property of interest, you're saying for the plan. By extension, I'm hoping that that can be worked towards, what would be included in an RFP.
Well, let's just start with bullet 3. Which is the plan. I mean, we've just had this large discussion about the RFP, let's find something we can actually
What
move
else,
forward with.
what else would you like to add to the plan?
I'm good with those two.
Sometimes I think the library, but that's a whole, just that block would be interesting to see what we could do.
City-owned properties.
Mm-hmm.
So if you want to include the library, you can also include the DOT site.
DOT site on the-
That's right. Just to the east of the transfer station.
Do we need to meet a blighted criteria? I guess there's a whole, we probably both can fit within that criteria.
I'm not sure that the library block can, but
Okay.
I think that the DOT site can. If,
Yeah, we can look at both of them and see.
And again, that's something that we can talk to Jay about as to how those properties could potentially fit into a request for proposals and how we could use those as additional leverage and inducement. Certainly, they're not necessarily blighted in their present configuration, but they could be part of this process. And if they're within the CRA, as I understand it, we would have the ability to use them in for this process. There's a potential, if you do this, this property could be included. Trading of properties, we've talked about the library as being very much underdeveloped, for example. I think the height limit there is 65 feet. You could put another 5 stories above the library. That's development capacity that we could use in this negotiation and in this discussion. But it's unlikely that we're going to see that level in an RFP response. That's pretty complicated.
well,
Showing the picture of the neighborhood in Seattle where they put the library and they had housing above it, it was pretty cool.
Exactly,
Sorry.
yeah.
I'm just thinking of other places where other
Oh,
things have been.
there's several great examples. Seattle and Portland both have that exact scenario.
Convention centers.
So,
yeah, but again, I mean, what Keith is describing is, I mean, it'd be nice to have that written out, you know, and explained. How an RFP might work is identifying some city-owned assets, like the DOT site and the library block, that could be, and surface lots,
Right.
that could be included in a project proposal. So that if somebody wanted to work with the Capital Center Tower owner, they could potentially include the development of the library, existing library here. But, yeah, so in terms of how sophisticated an RFP gets, I mean, we need to get it, we need it to be much more sophisticated than it is, and to draw some of these other concepts in. And maybe what we're saying by extension in terms of properties of interest, what Julie is mentioning about the current library block, is that goes into a category within the plan of city assets that could be made available as part of
sure,
the project. So it's not necessarily saying that's a site of interest in terms of blight criteria.
No,
But
right,
but it's an
understand.
asset. Does that make sense, Nathaniel?
It does.
So other properties or assets of interest, put in the mix.
Not for me at this time, but up to this point, we've included the word other, and I think we can stay with that for now. Perhaps when we need to adopt a plan, we need to make sure that's tight.
Or maybe not. Our legal counsel seems to be indicating that there's some flexibility there in how we approach that.
Okay.
Okay with that?
Ready for more?
Where would you like to go next?
I thought we were going to 2 next. Although we spent a little time there
Yeah.
already.
Yeah, I mean, again, my hope in terms of an RFP process is that we solicit participation from property owners. That's a formative step. That we look for additional guidance from our consultants, Jay Reich and Eco Northwest, in terms of how an RFP would be structured or could be structured. Maybe it's a matter of presenting options. And that we give a little bit of thought in terms of timing. I think in terms of how this works with public engagement, there's 2 parts to this public engagement process for me. And one is getting a broader public engaged in terms of just understanding the things that we've already come to strong agreement about, in terms of what CRA does and the area of interest and properties of interest and how it would work. And I wonder whether or not there should be just public engagement covering those things that we've already agreed to. Before we finalize how an RFP is going to be structured, or if we wait on broader public engagement until after an RFP. And the thing that this pivots on for me is whether or not we want to do an RFP before or after we write an ordinance. And I'm not sure about that, particularly from tonight's conversation.
I have opinions about all those things I'd be happy to share if now's the time.
Should we vote? Now's the time.
All right, so I think the ordinance that we're hoping to pass relates to a plan, not to a request for proposals or a request for qualifications. And I think that we're actually not that far away from being able to adopt a plan. I think that we need a public engagement process around that ordinance, but I think it's different than the kind of public engagement that we'll need around a project, which comes at a later date, in my opinion. And I think that what we've said to each other and at the retreat to the full council was that our interest was in adopting that ordinance and that plan before the end of the year. I'd like to actually beat that if possible. But I would like to comment on, what'd you call it, 5% preliminary proposal here on how to proceed with how the RFP process would work. In my experience, there's a very distinct difference between an RFQ and an RFP. And when you use an RFQ, it's actually a 2-step process. You lay out generally what you're trying to accomplish, what kind of services you're looking for, what sort of qualifications you desire, but you have some general idea what you're trying to do, and you cast a wide net to the development community to find partners to play with. And they come back with their qualifications, which are targeted towards the set of skills that you've said you want, the set of attributes that you're looking for. And then you prepare a request for proposal for 2, maybe 3 of those players. Depending on the level of confidence that you've gotten out of the RFQ process, then you ask for proposals from a very small set of proposers who you feel that you can work with and who have the skills that you're looking for, and maybe it's the financial capacity you're looking for, the whole set of things that you want to have a dance partner for. So it's a 2-step, which I don't think this anticipates, and what I think would be
That's
appropriate.
basically what I was proposing.
Okay,
It may not be clear in there,
it may be clear and I may have missed it, I'm not sure, but somehow I had a disconnect in my understanding of what was said here. The part of what threw me off was the level of specificity that this seems to be asking for in the RFQ process. I mean, it's asking for renderings, plans, graphic illustrations, sections. So it seems to be more specific at the RFQ level than I would anticipate. And normally at an RFQ level, the developer or the consultant is more talking about themselves than what the project would actually render in the end. Couple other comments on this 5%. On the evaluation process, I was surprised that we have a different set of considerations for the isthmus area. I don't get that. I don't
in addition
understand.
to,
Over and above, but I don't understand why that would be appropriate. So I don't, it just didn't make sense to me, why we would treat that area differently with either stricter criteria or a different
just
criteria.
because of the work that we've done.
Okay,
There seemed to be some agreement amongst council and amongst the CAC that somewhere between 30% and 40% open space within the isthmus was a desirable objective, for example. But you could leave those out and include them.
so I think we need
Not-
more conversation
Sure.
about that.
Sure.
We don't need to do that at this moment, but it was a strong question for me.
Sure.
And then the other one was that I didn't see a role for the CAC in the evaluation process. And that's, I think that we've got folks who have invested a heck of a lot of time and energy into what we're trying to achieve, and I certainly wouldn't want to cut them out of the process at this point.
I saw the CSC as part of the public process, that they are then folded into public so that you get that broader view coming forward. So I think I don't know, I just thought it's been part of the public so that they got to see it too, like everybody else.
See, I don't think they are like everybody else, so it's okay if we have a difference of opinion.
Okay. The other thing is, I like, say, we're now calling it RFQ, but I like that they actually have to bring a proposal, not just a qualification. Because if you're a property, what's your qualification? I own the property. I mean, I guess for me, I don't wanna keep wasting time. I wanna see what they are willing to provide and propose, and then we can actually start making some decisions to say, yes, it meets the qualification, or the criteria we're looking for, and let's bring it to the public, or no, it doesn't. Let's move to the next project. So, I mean, I don't know, that's just I'd rather see us move forward than just doing qualifications, because we could end up with 2 people saying, yeah, we're qualified. And then we slow down the process and have to make our proposals again.
I agree with you again,
That's
on all
scary.
counts. I don't think I mean, from my perspective, I don't think we're after an RFQ, but you keep using that, Keith, and other people are talking about it too, but I think this is a request for proposals, and that's how it should be framed. And qualifications is an element of that, but I'm interested in people bringing forward very specific proposals. And that's how I've interpreted some of the language that was in that draft. I'd like to know what somebody is proposing in terms of a specific site. Or if they want to go broader and talk about multiple sites, I'd like to understand how they're doing that. Qualifications is a piece of that for me, but I'm not seeing it as just purely a request for qualifications.
And again, the way that I was thinking about this, going through this process, at least in my head, was that we were looking for some level of specificity, but we're not looking for a fully developed project proposal that would cost thousands and thousands of dollars to develop. We're looking for a clear indication of a desire to partner with the city and a clear capacity to be a partner. And then an understanding of what the city's looking for. In similar processes, we've gone through RFQs where we've included a request that they include a project approach. And the project approach can include plans and some demonstration of thought as to how this group would address this particular property or properties. So it's not, I agree, we're probably talking about a couple of steps, at least in my mind, that we are going to have to go through. Even if we had a great level of specificity, it's very unlikely that we're going to say, yes, that's the one. There is going to have to be a level of negotiation that's going to take place. We may decide that this is the group that we want to negotiate with based on this input from the RFQ or the RFP. But we're not going to enter into a contract based on their response to this proposal.